"Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to take that flag down." That was the first sentence I ever heard from her. Not, "Good morning," not, "Welcome to the neighborhood," just a command, crisp and sugary, like she'd practiced it in the mirror a few times. I looked up from my coffee mug. The sun had just started climbing over Lake Serenity, laying gold streaks across the water. My porch smelled like pine and fresh roast, the kind of peace you don't interrupt unless the world's on fire. And there she was, mid-50s, tanned like a leather handbag, dressed head to toe in pastel pink golf gear. Her visor matched her lipstick, and a clipboard rested under one arm like a loaded weapon. "Excuse me?" I asked. "The flag, Mr. She flipped through a paper. "Cole, it violates our community's aesthetic code. As president of the Lakeside Estates Homeowners Association, I'm giving you a written warning." I blinked. "Aesthetic code?" "Yes. Section 12, subarticle C." She said it like she was quoting scripture. Flags, banners, or displays that disrupt the community's visual harmony. I took a slow sip. "Ma'am, that's the American flag. On my porch." She smiled, tight and bright, like a mannequin trying to be polite. "Oh, we all love the flag, of course. But rules are rules. Uniformity keeps property values high." I couldn't help laughing. "So, my porch is lowering your property values now?" She ignored the sarcasm. "Also, your lawn furniture isn't compliant. Only beige or forest green is allowed. Yours is..." She squinted. "Oak brown." I looked at my old wooden chairs, the same ones my father built 40 years ago. "Guess I missed that memo." "Well," she said briskly, pulling a form from her clipboard, "you can correct these violations or pay a fine of $500. And you'll need to register as a member of the HOA, 900 annual dues." "I've brought the paperwork." She handed me a pen. I didn't take it. "Ma'am, I think there's been a misunderstanding. My property isn't part of your HOA." "Oh, but it is, honey." Her tone sharpened. "When you bought this cabin, you agreed to abide by Lakeside's bylaws. It's all right here." She tapped her clipboard. "We're all neighbors here, and we expect cooperation." "I didn't sign any HOA agreement," I said evenly. "Checked the deed myself before I bought the place." Her lips twitched, the first crack in her perfect smile. "If you want to make this difficult, I can file a complaint with code enforcement. They tend to listen when I call." That was the moment I knew what kind of neighbor I was dealing with. There's a certain tone bullies use. Soft, fake sweet, wrapped around a threat like barbed wire under a ribbon. I set my coffee down. "Go ahead," I said quietly. "But maybe, before you do, you should double-check your paperwork." Her eyebrows pulled tight. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," I said, smiling. "Just a feeling." She stared at me for a long second, trying to decide whether I was bluffing, then scribbled something on her clipboard. "You'll be hearing from the association, Mr. Cole." "I'm sure I will." She turned on her spotless white sneakers, climbed into her golf cart, the one with HOA Patrol printed in bold blue letters, and sped down the gravel road, kicking up dust and ego behind her. I watched her disappear between the trees, her pink visor glinting in the sunlight. The lake was still again, silent except for the soft hum of the morning breeze. I sat back down, finished my coffee, and stared across the cove at her pristine white house. Big, proud, and way too perfect for a person like her. Something about the way she said "our community" stuck with me. I couldn't explain why, but it felt off, like she was guarding something that didn't belong to her. I didn't know it yet, but that morning, that one stupid argument over a flag was about to turn into a full-blown war. And like every war I'd ever been in, I didn't plan on losing. Not this time, not to her. I moved to Lake Serenity for the silence, not the kind of silence that feels empty, the kind that hums with life. The kind you only notice when the city noise finally stops ringing in your ears. Every morning, I'd sit on that porch with a mug of dark roast and watch the mist roll off the water like a living thing. The loons would call somewhere out near the reeds, and the smell of pine would drift down from the ridge behind the cabin. It was peace, the kind you can't buy, the kind I'd earned. After 20 years of engineering work for the Army Corps, I'd had my fill of noise. Diesel engines, base alarms, radios that never stopped. When I retired, I wanted a place where time moved slow enough to notice it passing. So, when I found the cabin listing, pre-HOA lakeside property, built in 1968, grandfathered utilities, I didn't even haggle the price. I just bought it. The first few months were perfect. Neighbors waved when they passed. People fished off their docks, and the only rule seemed to be mind your own business. Then came Karen Wellington, and her clipboard revolution. She hadn't been here long, maybe a year. Bought a big white colonial across the cove, gutted it, rebuilt it with a wine cellar, and declared herself president of something called the Lakeside Estates Homeowners Association. At first, I thought it was just a hobby club, a few overzealous retirees trying to keep the lawns neat. But then she started sending out notices of violation to people who had lived here decades before her. I'd seen one taped to my neighbor Sam Washington's door a week before she came to me about the flag. Sam's a Vietnam vet, 81 years old, walks with a cane. The notice said his boat shed was non-compliant with architectural standards. I remember him laughing when I asked about it. "Son, I built that shed before that woman was even born," he said. "Ain't no HOA telling me what shade of blue I can paint my own door." That was Sam, stubborn as they come, but right on principle. 2 days later, someone reported him for noise disturbance. He told me a code officer came by because his old pickup was too loud. I didn't have to guess who called it in. That's when I realized Karen's version of community wasn't about togetherness. It was about control. She wasn't running a neighborhood. She was building a little kingdom, and the rest of us were supposed to kneel. Still, I tried to stay out of it. I told myself she'd get bored. Or maybe someone at the county would finally tell her she had no authority outside her own property lines. But she didn't get bored. She doubled down. One afternoon, I found a man taking photos of my dock. Said he was documenting potential encroachments. I asked who sent him. "Lakeside Estates Compliance Committee," he said. I looked at his badge, laminated paper, clip art logo, and the words "Authorized Inspector." I told him to leave. He did, after I started recording him with my phone. Later that night, I saw a post on the neighborhood Facebook page. "Some residents are refusing to cooperate with community standards. Remember, collective pride equals higher property values. Karen W." That's when I knew she was turning the neighborhood against itself. By the end of that week, 3 more people had gotten fines for unapproved exterior decor. One woman cried because she'd planted the wrong color flowers. Another got cited for using a metal mailbox instead of wood. It would have been funny if it weren't so pathetic. But the thing about power, even fake power, is that enough people will believe in it if you say it confidently enough. I started collecting evidence, quietly. Printed every notice, screenshot every post, photographed every official document she sent. I wasn't sure what I'd do with it yet, but old habits die hard. In the Army, we used to say, documentation wins wars. And this was starting to feel like one. That night, as the sun dipped low and the lake turned orange, I sat on the porch again. Same chair, same mug, same view, but it felt different. For the first time, I noticed how quiet it was. Too quiet, like the lake was holding its breath. I remember thinking, peace never lasts long when someone like her moves in. 3 days after the flag incident, I came home from town to find an envelope taped to my front door. No return address, just bold red letters that read, "Official Notice of Violation, Lakeside Estates Homeowners Association." Inside was a form printed on glossy paper, filled with legal-sounding phrases that looked impressive until you actually read them. Failure to maintain dock aesthetic standards. Non-compliant flagpole height. Unauthorized exterior furnishings. Total fines due, $9.75, deadline, 30 days. Payment instructions, a P.O. box in town. I couldn't help smiling. It was almost artistic, the way she mixed arrogance with amateur law. But the average person wouldn't know any better. Most folks see the word homeowners association and panic. That's what people like Karen count on, fear disguised as paperwork. So, I did what I'd been trained to do for 2 decades in uniform, verify before you engage. The next morning, I drove into Cedar Falls, parked in front of the county courthouse, a brick relic from 1947 that smelled like mildew and bureaucracy, and headed downstairs to the records office. The air was cool, filled with the sound of humming fluorescent lights and the slow shuffle of paper. That's where I met Dolores. She was about 70, thin as a rake, glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. The kind of woman who had probably seen more scams than the internet itself. "Morning, ma'am," I said, setting the so-called violation letter on the counter. I need to check if this HOA is actually registered with the county. She squinted at the letter, then chuckled. Another one of those, huh? Let me guess. Ms. Wellington? I blinked. You know her? Oh, honey, she said, pulling out a file drawer that squealed in protest. She's been down here half a dozen times this month, asking about enforcement authority. Thinks she can run the lake like a subdivision in Phoenix. Bless her heart. Dolores flipped through folders, her long nails clicking softly against the paper. Finally, she pulled out a thin manila file labeled Lakeside Estates Homeowners Association, Inc. Registered 18 months ago, she said. Has 12 members, out of 47 properties. No county recognition, no enforcement authority, just a private club, far as the law's concerned. I leaned against the counter. So she can't actually fine anybody? She can't fine a mosquito, Dolores said dryly. She can pretend she can, and folks might pay if they don't know better, but legally, she's got no more power than the garden club. I laughed. Appreciate the confirmation. She lowered her voice. Off the record, son. Keep your receipts and your cool. Women like that thrive on reaction. You'll catch her with her own paperwork if you're patient. Good advice, as it turned out. On my way out, I grabbed copies of the registration documents for the so-called HOA. 12 names, mostly absentee owners or short-term renters. One name caught my eye, Carmichael Holdings, LLC. Sounded like a business, not a neighbor. I made a note to dig deeper later. That night, I sat at my desk with a whiskey and a stack of printouts. The more I read, the clearer it became. This wasn't an association. It was a shell. A legal costume stitched together so Karen could bully people under the guise of community improvement. I checked the Minnesota Business Registry online. Sure enough, the HOA's mailing address matched her home address. President, Karen Wellington. Treasurer, Karen Wellington. Secretary. Wait for it. Also Karen Wellington. No board, no oversight, just one woman and her printer. Somewhere between amusement and disbelief, I started laughing. Outside, the lake reflected the moonlight like polished glass. From across the water, I could see the faint glow of her kitchen lights. She was probably drafting her next violation letter, sipping Chardonnay, feeling like queen of the shore. I raised my glass toward the window. To your majesty, I muttered. Then I opened a new folder on my computer and labeled it Operation Paper Shield. Every screenshot, every document, every recording would go in there. I didn't know what endgame looked like yet, but if there's one thing the Army taught me, it's that every battle starts with intel. And this was just beginning. Back when I served, we had a saying, you don't win wars alone, you win them by knowing who's standing beside you. It turns out, the same rule applies to neighborhood feuds. 2 nights after my trip to the courthouse, I decided to test the waters. I logged into the Lake Serenity Facebook group, a place normally reserved for fishing photos, lost dogs, and recipes for hot dish, and posted something simple. Has anyone else gotten violation letters from the Lakeside Estates HOA? Just trying to figure out if this thing's legit. I hit post and closed my laptop. Didn't expect much. 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Then again, then again. By the time I finished my drink, I had 20 notifications. Apparently, I wasn't the only one she'd been after. First came Janet Lewis, retired librarian, 67, soft voice, sharp as a tack. She messaged me, "Oh, I've been keeping records, dear. Every notice she's ever sent. You should see my binder." Then Tom Jacobs, who ran the marina down by Route 12. That woman's bounced 3 checks for boat fuel and tried to sue me when I asked for payment. Count me in. Then Florence, 90 years old, white hair like frost, the kind of woman who could still split firewood and make a mean blueberry pie. She wrote, she called the sheriff on me for feeding ducks. Said it was an environmental hazard. Lord save us. That night, I created a private group chat and named it the Truth Squad. It started as a joke, but within hours, we had 12 members, all people Karen had harassed, fined, or tried to intimidate. Janet volunteered as our archivist, scanning and cataloging every violation letter, every threatening email, every photo of official notices. The woman organized chaos like it was her religion. Tom offered the marina's office as our unofficial headquarters, neutral ground, overlooking the lake, with a coffee pot that had seen more drama than a daytime soap. Florence provided moral support and baked goods. You can't fight tyranny on an empty stomach, she said, sliding a tray of brownies across the table. We met once a week, quietly, sometimes on porches, sometimes on boats, sometimes just over coffee. We weren't plotting revenge, we were documenting truth. Every complaint, every interaction, every bribe attempt that anyone witnessed went into the binder Janet kept like a holy text. What started as a few annoyed neighbors slowly became something else, a movement. People began to realize they weren't alone. That was the part Karen never understood. Bullies only win when they isolate their victims. Once folks started comparing notes, her illusion of power began to crack. One evening, Tom mentioned something interesting. You know that LLC name on her mail? Carmichael Holdings? I've seen that name on the county tax rolls. Not just her property, but a few rentals along the North Shore. That raised my eyebrows. Vacation rentals? Yeah, Tom said. Big money. She's been running weekend rentals like a hotel chain, except she never registered for a business license. The hypocrisy would have been funny if it wasn't so predictable. The woman preaching about community values was running an unlicensed commercial operation in the middle of a residential zone. Janet did some digging. Librarians are basically detectives with better filing systems, and confirmed it. She even found online listings under fake host names, but the contact number was the same, Karen's. That's when we realized this wasn't just a power trip. It was a business model. The more she controlled the neighborhood, the more she could intimidate longtime owners into selling or renting through her shell company. It wasn't about flags or lawns or mailboxes. It was about money. As I walked home that night, the air was cold and smelled like lake water and wood smoke. Across the cove, her mansion glowed white under the porch lights. Perfect, sterile, hollow. I thought about all the people she'd scared into silence. And for the first time since moving here, I didn't feel like a loner with a cabin. I felt like part of something bigger. The Truth Squad wasn't just a chat group anymore. It was a quiet resistance. And we were just getting started. A week after the Truth Squad formed, Karen struck back. It started with a knock, sharp, official, and way too early for a Saturday. When I opened the door, two men in matching polos stood on my porch. The shirts read, Lakeside Compliance Division. One carried a clipboard, the other, a camera. "Morning, sir," said Clipboard. "We're here to conduct a property inspection." I looked them over, no badges. No county insignia, not even a real company logo, just vinyl letters ironed on crooked. "Inspection?" I asked. "Under what authority?" "Per the Lakeside Estates HOA bylaws," he said, reading like a telemarketer. "Section..." "Let me stop you right there," I said. "You boys work for Karen?" They glanced at each other. Clipboard cleared his throat. "Mrs. Wellington is the president of the association, yes." "Good," I said, stepping forward. "Then you can tell your boss I don't recognize her jurisdiction on this property. And if you take one more step past that fence line, you'll be trespassing." Camera guy shifted uneasily. "We're just trying to do our job, sir." "Then get better jobs," I said, and shut the door. A few minutes later, I heard their golf cart sputter down the gravel road. I grabbed my phone, took photos of their license plate and shirts, and added them to the Operation Paper Shield folder. That was the moment I knew she'd escalated. Petty fines and fake letters were one thing. Sending goons with cameras was another. By the next day, Florence called. "She sent those same boys to my dock," she said, voice trembling with anger. "Told me my fishing lights were a nuisance violation. I told them to take their nonsense and shove it." 2 hours later, Tom at the marina reported something worse. County code enforcement had actually shown up. This time, real officials. Karen had filed a complaint claiming his fuel tanks were unlicensed and unsafe. That's when it hit me. She was testing how far she could get by mixing truth with lies. Use fake reports until someone real bites. And once the government steps in, it's a whole different ballgame. So I switched tactics. That night, I printed every incident log we'd collected. Photos, letters, timestamps, everything. Then I called an old friend, Arthur Kim, a real estate attorney I'd met years back during a land use project in Duluth. He answered on the second ring. "Cole, you finally retired or just bored?" "Bit of both," I said. "Listen, I've got a situation. Fake HOA, phony fines, possible harassment, and fraudulent filings. Need your eyes on it. Send me what you've got." I did, 50 pages of it. The next morning, Arthur called back, his voice almost amused. Well, she's ambitious, I'll give her that. But half these documents violate state law. She's not just pretending to be an HOA, she's operating one illegally. And if she's collecting money, that's wire fraud territory. He paused. You want me to dig? Dig, I said. I want every root exposed. For the next few days I laid low, kept the porch light off, watched the lake like it might whisper secrets. From across the cove, I'd sometimes see her, Karen, standing on her upper balcony, arms crossed, scanning the shoreline with binoculars like she was guarding a fortress. It was almost funny, if it weren't so pathetic. Then came the letter, certified mail this time, stamped with a real county seal. Notice of zoning violation, unauthorized structure, dock extension. Attached was a complaint filed by none other than Lakeside Estates HOA president, Ms. Karen Wellington. She'd reported my dock, the one built 50 years ago, as a new illegal addition, and somehow she'd convinced the zoning office to open a file. That night, I walked down to the water with a flashlight. The dock creaked under my boots, the reflection of her house rippling across the surface. Bright, perfect, smug. I traced my hand along the railing my father had built. He'd taught me that real structure comes from what's beneath the surface, the pilings, the foundation no one sees. That's when the idea hit me. She wanted a war of paperwork and politics. Fine, I'd give her one, but on my terms, not through shouting or threats, but through precision. Because if Karen Wellington was so obsessed with control, then the one thing that would destroy her wasn't anger, it was exposure. If there's one thing the Army teaches you, it's how to prepare for a fight before anyone else realizes one's coming. Arthur called 2 days after I sent him the full binder of evidence. I've reviewed everything, he said. Your HOA isn't just illegitimate, it's actively fraudulent. She's using fabricated bylaws, self-issued titles, and collecting unregistered dues. If she's sent mail across state lines or used online payments, that's potential wire and mail fraud. He paused, and I could almost hear the smirk through the phone. Congratulations, Ethan. You're sitting on a federal case. Appreciate that, I said dryly, but I'm not looking for a lawsuit yet. I want to end this clean, expose her, make sure she can't do this to anyone else. Arthur exhaled slowly. Then you're going to need to play it smart. Gather everything, dates, times, witnesses, and we're going to make the county, the sheriff, and the public see the pattern. That became the birth of Operation Paper Shield. For weeks, I treated it like a mission. I spent mornings going door to door, checking in with neighbors who had been too afraid to speak up. A few were nervous. They didn't want trouble. But when I showed them copies of the fake HOA registration, their fear turned to anger. Janet cataloged every message, every email chain. Tom collected statements from other marina owners who'd been threatened with fines. Florence dug up screenshots from the neighborhood Facebook group showing Karen publicly shaming residents. Each night, I'd sit by my desk lamp and organize it all. Tabs, labels, chronological logs. You could have mistaken my living room for a small war room, maps, names, and folders covering every inch of my coffee table. Arthur called again the following week. I've got something, he said. I ran the name Carmichael Holdings LLC. It's a property trust, registered to the same address as Karen's house. But here's the kicker. The trust's primary beneficiary is you. I froze. What? He continued. Your property deed lists a 60% controlling interest in the Northwoods Property Trust, which owns several parcels around Lake Serenity, including hers. You inherited it through your late uncle's estate, back in '09. Looks like the paperwork was updated when you bought your cabin. I leaned back in my chair, heart steady, mind spinning. So, she's technically renting from me? Arthur chuckled. Technically? She's been paying herself rent on land she doesn't own. You're her landlord, Ethan. I didn't say anything for a while, just sat there, listening to the lake wind push against the windows. Finally, I laughed, a low, quiet laugh that probably sounded insane to anyone else. Well, I said, I guess it's time to remind the good Madam President who really owns the castle. Careful, Arthur warned. If you play this wrong, she'll spin it as harassment or retaliation. Let me handle the paperwork. You just keep gathering proof. That night, I took a long walk down to the dock. The moonlight painted the water silver, calm and endless. Across the cove, Karen's porch lights glowed like beacons. Blinding, sterile, artificial. Somewhere out there, she was still sitting in her spotless kitchen, sipping her wine, probably drafting the next round of violation notices. But the tide had shifted. She just didn't know it yet. The next morning, I met with the Truth Squad at Tom's Marina. Janet laid out her binder like it was a sacred relic, color-coded and tabbed. Florence handed out coffee and blueberry muffins. Tom rolled in a whiteboard from the boat repair shop and drew boxes and arrows like we were planning a heist. We laughed more than we should have. Maybe it was the absurdity of it all. A handful of retirees and veterans planning to take down a fake HOA queen pin. But behind the laughter was purpose. Janet looked at me and said, "What's our next move, Captain?" I smiled at that. It had been a long time since anyone called me that. "Our next move," I said, "is sunlight." Arthur helped draft a report, 52 pages long, detailing every fake notice, every unauthorized inspection, every illegal fee. He included citations from state code, screenshots from the Secretary of State's database, even the rental listings under Karen's name. We sent copies to 3 places: the county recorder's office, the sheriff's department, and the Lakeside Community Board meeting, scheduled for the following Thursday. That last one was my idea. If Karen wanted to play president, she could face her constituents. When I sealed the envelope, I wrote 3 words across the back in black marker: "For transparency's sake." As the sun went down, I stood on my porch, watching the light fade across the lake. The air smelled of rain and pine. A storm was coming. I could feel it in my bones. But this time, it wouldn't be quiet. This time, she'd hear it roar. The Thursday evening of the meeting came dressed like a thunderstorm in disguise. Humid air, restless wind, and a gray sky that promised noise. The Lakeside Community Hall was a squat brick building with a tin roof and bad lighting. I parked my truck out front, watching neighbors trickle in, some curious, some nervous, some already whispering. Karen's golf cart was parked front and center, polished to a shine, with the words HOA President freshly re-stenciled on the side. Of course. Inside, folding chairs were set in crooked rows. A big paper banner read, "Lakeside Estates HOA, monthly board meeting." Except there wasn't a board. Just one woman behind a table lined with pink folders and sparkling pens. Karen. She looked radiant in the way tyrants do before the fall, confident, rehearsed, unaware of the camera slowly focusing. When she saw me, her smile twitched, but didn't fade. "Mr. Cole," she said sweetly, "I wasn't expecting you to attend." "Wouldn't miss it," I said, taking a seat near the front. The room filled. Janet sat behind me, binder in her lap. Tom leaned against the wall near the back, arms crossed. Florence brought cookies, bless her heart. The Truth Squad was in position. Karen cleared her throat. "Thank you all for coming. As your president, I'd like to start tonight by addressing recent misinformation circulating about our association." A few murmurs rippled through the crowd. She continued, "Certain residents have suggested that our HOA lacks authority or proper registration. Let me assure you, that is completely false. Lakeside Estates is a fully recognized homeowners association, and non-compliance will result in fines or legal action." She smiled like a politician at a podium. I raised my hand. "May I?" Karen hesitated, then gave a curt nod. Briefly, I stood, holding a thin manila folder. "Appreciate it. I'd just like to clarify something for the record." I opened the folder and pulled out a printed document, county registration form, highlighted and stamped. "This," I said, "is the official record of the so-called Lakeside Estates Homeowners Association." I let the silence hang for a second. It lists 12 members, no county charter, no government recognition, no enforcement authority, and all 3 officer positions, president, treasurer, and secretary, belong to one person. I turned the page toward her. "You." The air shifted. A low murmur spread like wind through dry grass. Karen's smile faltered. "That's irrelevant. We operate under community consent." "Community consent?" I asked. "You mean the people you fined, threatened, and reported to code enforcement? The ones you called non-compliant because they wouldn't pay a fake fee?" Her jaw clenched. "You have no right to speak here. You're not a dues-paying member." I took a slow step forward. "You're right, I'm not. And I never will be, because my property isn't part of your association. It never was. Gasps and whispers filled the room. Karen's face flushed crimson. That's not true. I have the deeds. I checked them, I said calmly. Twice. With the county and with my attorney. I reached into the folder again and pulled out another sheet. Thicker paper this time, embossed with the seal of the Northwoods Property Trust. See, here's the interesting part, I said, handing it to her. This document shows ownership of several parcels around Lake Serenity, including yours. She looked down at it, confusion flickering into panic. What are you talking about? That trust, I said quietly, is majority owned by me. The room went still. You could have heard the ceiling fan creak. I leaned closer, just enough for her to hear the steel in my voice. So, before you send me another fine or inspection notice, maybe double-check your lease agreement, because you've been paying rent, Karen, to me. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Tom let out a low whistle. Someone near the back chuckled. Even Janet couldn't hide her smile. Karen tried to recover. This is harassment. You can't... I held up a hand. No, ma'am. What you can't do is impersonate a governing body, collect illegal dues, falsify legal notices, and defraud your neighbors. That's what the sheriff will be explaining when they review this packet. I gestured to the thick envelope sitting on the front table. Arthur's report, labeled neatly. Fraudulent HOA operations, evidence summary. Karen stood frozen, staring at it like a live grenade. Then Janet spoke, her voice clear and sharp. I motion to dissolve the Lakeside Estates HOA. Florence seconded it before Karen could breathe. Half the room raised their hands. Karen's voice cracked. You can't vote. This isn't... Tom cut her off. It's over, Karen. She looked at me, eyes glassy with fury and disbelief. You planned this. I gave a faint smile. No, ma'am. You did. I just showed up with the paperwork. The crowd started clapping, slow at first, then building. Karen gathered her papers in a trembling hand and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the banner fell off the wall. For the first time in months, the room felt light again. I sat back down, exhaling. Outside, thunder rolled across the lake, right on cue. The morning after the meeting, the lake felt different. It wasn't the kind of change you see, it was the kind you hear. The air was lighter, the water moved freer. The usual echo of Karen's golf cart whining across the shore was gone. I stood on the porch with my coffee, watching fog drift low over the surface. For the first time in months, the quiet didn't feel tense. It felt earned. Then the phone started ringing. First, it was Tom. Buddy, it's all over Facebook, he said, half laughing. Someone filmed the whole meeting. It's got 5,000 views already. People from the next town over are commenting like it's a courtroom drama. Then Janet called. Dolores from the courthouse stopped by this morning. She said the county recorder's office has already received half a dozen complaints against Karen's fake HOA. They're opening an investigation. By noon, the local radio station was running the headline. Lake Serenity HOA president accused of fraud. Residents claim fake dues, threats. I didn't post a thing. Didn't need to. The truth was doing just fine on its own. Around 3 in the afternoon, Arthur called. She's panicking, he said. I got word her attorney contacted the DA's office, asking about potential civil misunderstandings. They're trying to get ahead of this before it turns criminal. I didn't answer right away. I was watching a heron glide low across the water, wings stretched wide, free and quiet. Finally, I said, You think it will? Arthur chuckled softly. It already has. The minute she mailed those fake fines, she crossed into felony territory. But let's not gloat. The county's got to make it official. You just keep your head down. Copy that, I said. That night, the Truth Squad met at Florence's cabin. No agendas, no plans, just stories, laughter, and pie. Sam Washington, the old Vietnam vet, even showed up, walking cane and all. He clapped me on the shoulder and said, Hell of a thing you did, son. Reminds me of '68, except back then, the enemy didn't bake banana bread. We laughed until our sides hurt. But behind the jokes, there was a strange heaviness. Some folks were relieved, others were angry, not just at Karen, but at themselves for letting it go on so long. Janet summed it up best. She made us doubt our own rights. That's the worst kind of theft, the kind that takes your confidence. I nodded. That's why we document, because truth fades fast when no one writes it down. By the end of the week, the DA had officially opened a fraud investigation. Arthur forwarded me the statement. Subject: investigation into unlicensed HOA activity, mail fraud, and property misrepresentation, Lake Serenity region. They didn't name her yet, but they didn't need to. Everyone knew. Karen disappeared for a few days after that. Her house stayed dark, blinds drawn. Rumor was she'd driven into the city to consult legal counsel. Then, on the fifth night, I heard the familiar whine of her golf cart again. Headlights cut through the trees. And I saw her stop by the mailbox at the end of my drive. She sat there for a long time, just staring at my cabin, then turned around and left. Didn't say a word. Didn't need to. The next morning, a for sale sign appeared on her lawn. No one waved. No one stopped by to ask why. Lake Serenity moved on like a body healing after infection. Slowly, quietly, cell by cell. The county sent official letters dissolving the unregistered HOA. Property deeds were corrected, fines refunded. The sheriff's department even hosted a community rights workshop at the hall, led by Dolores, of all people. Tom put up a new sign at the marina. No fees, no fear, no fake HOA. We all laughed when we saw it, but there was pride under that laughter, a sense of having taken something back. One evening, as the sun melted into the water, Florence joined me on the dock. She handed me a slice of pie and said, "You know, Ethan, I don't think she was evil, just addicted to control. People like that don't know who they are without someone to boss around." I nodded. Maybe, but control's a dangerous drug. We sat in silence for a long while, listening to the water slap gently against the posts. The lake was calm again, but calm has a weight to it too, the kind that reminds you how loud things once were. I took a deep breath and said quietly, "Operation Paper Shield, mission complete." Florence smiled. "So, what now, Captain?" I looked out at the horizon, golden and endless. "Now," I said, "we rebuild." Justice doesn't move fast in small towns. It creaks, it hesitates, it double-checks every form in triplicate, but when it finally starts rolling, it doesn't stop. About 2 weeks after Karen's for sale sign went up, Arthur called. "Ethan," he said, "you might want to sit down for this one. The county DA filed formal charges this morning." I set my coffee down and leaned back in the chair. "What kind of charges?" 3 counts of mail fraud, 2 counts of harassment, 1 of impersonating a public official, and 1 for unlawful collection of funds. They're bringing in the state's attorney, which means it's moving up the ladder. For a second, I didn't say anything, just listened to the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the old wall clock. Finally, I said, "She's actually going to court." "She is," Arthur confirmed, "and they've requested your testimony. You and half the lake." I smiled faintly. "Guess I'll iron a shirt." The first pretrial hearing was held in the same courthouse where I'd first met Dolores. The place looked different now, brighter somehow, maybe because the air felt cleaner. When I walked into the lobby, neighbors nodded. Some smiled, others just gave that silent look people give when gratitude doesn't need words. Dolores waved from behind the counter. "Told you, paperwork wins wars," she said with a wink. Karen arrived 10 minutes late, wearing oversized sunglasses and a tight black suit that looked more funeral than formal. Her lawyer, a nervous man with a briefcase too new, followed close behind. She didn't look at me, didn't look at anyone. The prosecutor read the charges in a slow, deliberate voice, each word heavier than the one before it. When he said fraudulent activity under the guise of a homeowners association, a ripple of murmurs filled the courtroom. Arthur leaned over and whispered, "That's the first time that phrase has been used in this county. Might set precedent." I whispered back, "Good." When my turn came to testify, I took the stand, swore the oath, and looked out over the room. Familiar faces from Lake Serenity, every one of them waiting to see if the law would see what we'd lived. The prosecutor started simple. "Mr. Cole, how did your involvement with Ms. Wellington begin?" "With a flag," I said. "She told me to take it down." That got a few smiles from the gallery. I went through the rest. The letters, the fake inspections, the Facebook posts, the county complaint she filed about my dock. Each time I produced evidence, Arthur handed the copies up like ammunition in a firefight. Karen's lawyer tried to shake me, asked if I had a personal vendetta. I told him no. I just had receipts. The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it was enough to crack the room open. When it was all over, I stepped down, and Karen finally looked at me. Not with anger this time, with something smaller, confusion maybe, or the realization that she'd built her empire out of printer paper and ego. The judge scheduled the trial for late spring. Until then, she was barred from contacting any residents, collecting payments, or representing herself as an HOA officer. By the time I walked out into the sunlight, I could hear the courthouse bells ringing, slow, echoing, final. A reporter from Channel 7 stopped me on the steps. "Mr. Cole, do you feel vindicated?" she asked. I thought for a moment. "I feel grateful," I said. "Not everyone gets to see justice play out this clean." Arthur chuckled beside me. "You always this humble?" "Only when cameras are rolling," I said. Back at the lake, the world had already begun to settle. People waved again. Kids fished off the docks. The old fear was gone, replaced with laughter that carried across the water like it used to. Janet hosted a small potluck at the hall the following weekend. On the chalkboard above the coffee urn, she'd written, "Integrity, HOA free since 25. We all laughed. Even I did. But when I went home that night, I couldn't help feeling a strange mix of pride and sadness. I didn't hate Karen. Truth is, I pitied her. She'd built a fortress out of rules and power trips because she was terrified of being ordinary, terrified of not being in charge. But when control becomes your only compass, losing it feels like the end of the world. And maybe, for her, it was. As the moon rose over Lake Serenity, I poured myself a drink and sat on the dock, listening to the frogs start their evening chorus. The water lapped softly against the pilings, the same sound that had greeted me every morning since I moved here. This time, though, it didn't sound lonely. It sounded like peace. Spring came late that year. The ice broke early on the lake, but the air still carried a bite, that kind of northern chill that makes truth sound sharper. Karen's trial started on a Monday morning, in the same courthouse where justice had been limping along for decades. The place smelled of floor wax, old books, and second chances. By then, the story had spread far beyond Lake Serenity. A few reporters showed up. Some folks whispered that the county might use this case to set an example, a message to anyone who thought intimidation could be disguised as community management. Arthur and I sat together in the hallway before the session began. He adjusted his tie, navy blue, same one he'd worn since Carter was president, and said, "You ready, Ethan?" "As I'll ever be," I said. He nodded. "Remember, you don't need to sound righteous, just honest. Truth sells itself." Inside, the courtroom was packed. Not just our neighbors, but small-town officials, clerks, even deputies from other counties who had heard the story. It felt less like a trial and more like a reckoning. Karen sat at the defendant's table, pale and rigid. Gone was the pastel confidence and manicured smile. She looked smaller, like someone who had finally realized the crown she'd been wearing was paper. The prosecutor stood. "Your Honor, the state of Minnesota presents the case of People v. Karen Wellington on charges of mail fraud, impersonating a public officer, harassment, and attempted bribery of county officials." Each word landed like a hammer blow. When they called me to the stand, the room grew so quiet you could hear the ceiling fan click. "Mr. Cole," the prosecutor began, "you've known Ms. Wellington for how long?" "About a year and a half," I said. "And in that time, did she ever provide legal documentation showing that her homeowners association had jurisdiction over your property?" "No, sir. What she provided were threats printed on stationery." A few people chuckled. Even the judge cracked a half smile. He nodded. "Let's talk about those letters. What was your response when you received them?" "I documented everything," I said simply. "That's what my grandfather taught me. If someone lies to you on paper, get your own paper ready." That got a few approving murmurs. I described the pattern. The fake notices, the fines, the harassment, the night she called the police on me for trespassing on my own land. "And when did you discover that Ms. Wellington was, in fact, your tenant?" the prosecutor asked. "About 3 months after that, through my attorney. She'd been renting the property across the lake through a management company my grandfather's trust owned." There was an audible gasp from the gallery. Even though everyone already knew, hearing it in court made it real. Karen's lawyer objected. The judge overruled him. "Continue, Mr. Cole," the prosecutor said. I gave her every chance to stop. Offered mediation, wrote letters, tried to handle it quietly. But she doubled down, started filing false reports, bribing officials, even damaging property. That's when I decided enough was enough. I looked at Karen then. She wouldn't meet my eyes. When I stepped down, Florence was next, cane in hand, Bible in her purse. She told the court how Karen had threatened to sue her over bird feeders. Janet testified, binder in her lap, every tab labeled and color-coded like a war map. Tom spoke about the bribes and bounced checks. By the time the prosecution rested, Karen's lawyer looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. Then came her turn. Karen stood, trembling. Her voice was brittle, fragile. "I was just trying to make the community better," she said. "People were letting things go to ruin. Docks, fences, boats. I thought if someone didn't take charge, property values would crash." The prosecutor's response was simple. "And did you believe that gave you the right to impersonate government authority and extort your neighbors?" Karen's silence said everything. After closing arguments, the jury deliberated for just under 2 hours. When they returned, the foreman's voice didn't waver. "We, the jury, find the defendant guilty on all counts." A quiet gasp swept through the courtroom. Not shock, just release. The judge's gavel came down once. "Sentencing will follow in 30 days. Ms. Wellington, you are hereby remanded to custody pending review." She froze, then looked at me, not with hate this time, but something closer to relief, like the war she'd started was finally over, even for her. As the deputies led her away, the audience didn't cheer or clap. They just stood, quietly, respectfully, as if honoring the end of a long storm. Outside, the clouds were breaking. The sunlight spilled across the courthouse steps, warm and clear. Arthur patted my shoulder. "Justice done," he said softly. "Yeah," I said, watching the reflection of light ripple on the courthouse windows. "Justice, and maybe mercy too." When I got back to Lake Serenity that evening, the water was calm, the kind of calm that comes only after chaos. Kids were skipping stones. The flag on my porch fluttered in a soft breeze. And for the first time in a long while, the lake lived up to its name again. Lake Serenity. I stood there as the sun sank behind the trees, gold light spilling across the ripples, and thought, maybe some tides are worth the storm it takes to turn them. Summer came like forgiveness, slow, steady, and warmer than anyone expected. By June, Lake Serenity looked like itself again. The water ran clear, kids were back on paddleboards, and the old pier, once rotting, had been rebuilt by half the neighborhood in a weekend of laughter and beer coolers. The ghost of Karen Wellington lingered only in memory, like the smell of smoke after a fire. I spent most mornings on the porch, coffee in hand, watching fog lift off the lake. It was strange how peaceful silence sounded when you weren't waiting for trouble anymore. Then one Saturday, Florence knocked on my door. "Town meeting at 7, she said. "They're talking about forming a real association this time, one that actually helps people." I smiled. "A good HOA? That might be rarer than a unicorn." She grinned. "Maybe so. But we've got good people now." That night, the hall was packed. No tension, no threats, just neighbors with folding chairs and homemade pies. Janet stood at the front, notebook in hand, and said, "We've all seen what happens when power goes unchecked. If we do this, it'll be transparent, voluntary, and focused on the lake, not control." Tom raised his beer. "Hear, hear. Let's call it the Lake Serenity Cooperative. No dues, just donations and sweat equity." Everyone clapped. It wasn't about rules anymore. It was about rebuilding trust. They elected a small committee, Florence as chair, Janet as treasurer, Tom as maintenance head, and somehow me as community liaison, whatever that meant. After the meeting, Florence said, "Ethan, you're good at keeping people honest, without making them feel small." I shrugged. "Old military trick. Praise in public, correct in private." She laughed. "Maybe write that in our bylaws." In the following weeks, the cooperative turned ideas into actions. We cleaned the shoreline, repaired docks, built a bulletin board at the marina for local notices, free ads, boat rentals, community events. The sense of ownership returned, but this time it was shared. Dolores from the courthouse visited one afternoon with official papers dissolving the old HOA permanently. She handed them to me with a grin. "Frame it," she said. "It's your trophy." I did, right next to my grandfather's Navy photograph. By July 4th, the community held its first Freedom on the Water celebration. Kids waved flags, Tom grilled burgers big enough to sink a canoe, and someone launched fireworks that reflected perfectly over the glassy surface of the lake. As the finale burst overhead, Florence leaned toward me. "Feels like we earned this one, doesn't it?" "Every spark," I said. A week later, a letter arrived. Return address: Wellington and Associates, LLC. I hesitated before opening it, half expecting some legal curveball, but inside was a short, handwritten note. "Mr. Cole, I've accepted the plea deal. Community service, restitution, no jail. I'm leaving the state for good. I hope you'll believe me when I say I'm sorry, not for being caught, but for what I became." Karen Wellington. I read it twice, then set it down. Arthur called that evening. "You see the letter?" "Yeah." "Gonna reply?" "I think silence says enough," I said. "She's got her road. We've got ours." He paused. "You're a better man than most. Just tired of fighting," I said. That night, I walked down to the dock. The moon was high, the water black and silver. I thought about all the nights I'd stood there before, angry, suspicious, waiting for the next confrontation. Now, there was only peace. A loon called somewhere across the water, echoing like a memory you don't mind keeping. I knelt down, trailed my fingers in the lake, and whispered, "You're clean again, old friend." From the corner of my eye, I saw lights from other cabins flicker, little beacons across the water, families settling in, laughter spilling from porches, the smell of barbecue drifting over the wind. Lake Serenity had its soul back, and maybe, just maybe, so did I. As I turned to go inside, I glanced at the framed certificate on the wall. Dissolution of unregistered HOA, County of Clearwater, filed 25. Under it, I'd taped a small handwritten note from Florence. "We don't need rulers here, just good neighbors." I smiled. Sometimes redemption doesn't come with applause or headlines. Sometimes it just sits quietly on the water, reflecting the sun like nothing bad ever happened. The tide had turned and stayed turned. It's funny how quiet feels different once you've fought for it. A year has passed since the day the county sealed the case, but every morning I still wake to the same sound: the water brushing the dock, the flag whispering against the pole, and that one stubborn woodpecker who insists on starting his shift at sunrise. Some mornings, I pour my coffee and think about the first day I met Karen Wellington. That pink visor, that clipboard, that tone. I used to think she was the problem. Now I realize she was just the symptom. Power without accountability, that's the real sickness. And small towns, God bless them, are breeding grounds for it when people stop paying attention. I kept every document from the ordeal: the letters, the fines, the screenshots, the certified mail receipts. They sit in a weatherproof box under my desk labeled Operation Paper Shield. Not because I plan to use them again, but because they remind me of something I almost forgot. You can't defend what you don't understand. That's the thing about rights. They're like fences. Not meant to keep people out, but to remind everyone where the property line ends. Sometimes when visitors stop by, friends from town, or a new family buying their first cabin, they'll ask about the fake HOA story. I usually smile and say, "It wasn't about an HOA. It was about people forgetting that freedom's supposed to be boring." They laugh, not sure what I mean. But it's true. Freedom isn't fireworks or flags. It's being left alone on a Tuesday morning to drink your coffee without someone knocking on your door demanding dues. And I guess that's why I stayed here. Lake Serenity's changed since then. The cooperative we formed is still running. Small, simple, honest. No power trips, no secret bylaws, just neighbors mowing each other's lawns when the mower breaks, fixing docks together, organizing cleanup days. Florence still brings pie to every meeting. Tom swears he's going to retire from maintenance duty every month, then shows up first anyway. Janet runs the budget like a Navy accountant. We even built a memorial bench near the marina, carved from driftwood and sealed in varnish. It says, "For those who stood up when silence was easier." Sometimes I sit there at sunset and think about how much that line cost, and how worth it was. One evening, a young couple moved into the old Wellington house. Nice folks. Teachers, both of them. They stopped by to introduce themselves, nervous that I might hold a grudge against the place. I told them, "You didn't inherit her mess. You inherited her view." They smiled, and I helped them unload boxes until dusk. Before I left, the wife asked, "Were all those stories true about the fake HOA and the landlord twist?" I chuckled. "Every word, but truth's only half the story. The other half is what you do with it." As I walked back home, fireflies flickered in the reeds. The air smelled like pine and lake mist, the kind of scent that only exists where peace is hard won. I paused at the end of the dock, watching the reflection of my cabin lights ripple on the water. My grandfather used to say, "Ethan, never pick a fight you can't end with a handshake." I didn't quite understand it back then. Now I do. Because winning isn't about crushing the other side. It's about restoring balance, making sure the next fool who thinks they can play dictator learns there's a price to pay for it. And sometimes that lesson doesn't come from anger or revenge. It comes from paperwork, patience, and a very long memory. The stars came out one by one. I could see my reflection in the water, older, calmer, maybe even a little wiser. I raised my coffee mug in a quiet salute to the lake and said aloud, "Here's to good neighbors, honest paper, and sleeping sound." The breeze stirred, carrying the scent of summer across the water. That's the funny thing about peace. Once you've earned it, it doesn't feel silent anymore. It hums. And as for Karen Wellington, wherever she is, I hope she's found her own kind of calm. Because the truth is, I stopped being angry a long time ago. You can't live by the lake and carry grudges. They'll drown you faster than the water ever could. So I let it go. Now, when folks ask what I learned from it all, I tell them this: own your land, know your laws, and never mistake noise for authority. Then I smile, lean back in my chair, and listen to the lake whisper back. Because Lake Serenity, my lake, finally lives up to its name.